Okay, and welcome back. I was just thinking back on a time when Gemmell, somewhere in the 80s, I think it was very early 80s, maybe in the late 70s, Gemmell came in with an essay called Delacroix as an Influence. He was writing a volume, he was trying to put a book together that would have included Delacroix and many other people of that era in French art. And I'd have to say we were somewhat surprised. Delacroix had never had a particularly high recommendation, shall we say, from Mr. Gemmell. Uh, and I mean to see if I can make that text available for you online. But today I'm doing Delacroix as an influence in a sense. Delacroix in the Boston School. I've never done a video. I've done Velasquez in the Boston School and others, but never Delacroix. It might be worth doing a full-scale video on it, but this one is just a review of some work by Delacroix, and in particular, 2 points of a discussion. One very specifically related to the conversation of Hale, talking about drawing is everything, putting words in his mouth, of course, the way I phrased that summary. In such a summary way. But let me first thank our people who've been faithful in bringing us some cash this week. Lauren K., thank you, recurring. And 2 people I don't think I've seen you donate before, Jillian C. and Patrick S. Guys, thank you so very much. It's always needed. Yeah, let's just go and have a quick look, though, at a couple. First of all, when I was a kid, this was one of those paintings that really impressed me. It was Liberty Leading the People. Kind of an interesting subject for these times when there seems to be so much oppression on the earth, and maybe the call is, among a lot of us in different nations, is to the old call of individual liberty, the American model, if you want to put it that way, what we modeled in our Constitution. But the French, obviously they were doing stuff that was, sort of about power to the people again with a liberty orientation. Way back then, this is in the 1700s. 1798 was a major pivotal thing in France, but anyway, I'm just mentioning this because here's Delacroix, and he's with Liberty Leading the People doing a monumental painting. This is a thing that creates rather becomes an icon, rather becomes a great symbol. So nevertheless, and that's one of the strong points. The other one I was showing demonstrates his remarkable skills as a draftsman. When these horses, for example, are done out of his head. I mean, they're from imagination, and he uses the word invention to describe creating horses, doing things like this. But that wonderful sense of a three-dimensional of the rider and the horse and the world that he's in there, all that stuff is well known for him to be considered one of the great draftsmen of all time. He considered Daumier better than him. And it's an interesting thing. Even I think Degas says a similar thing. I think of Degas and Delacroix in very high terms, but I don't think of him as being draftsmen of the same type. So Degas, I don't know if he ever really actually invents. He actually is always working with a model. So, but that's never in the case of what we're doing today. That's kind of neither here nor there. But what you don't know about Delacroix is his role as a colorist. Well, I shouldn't say that. Everybody, the whole conversation about Delacroix is primarily not about his draftsmanship, but about his color. And you begin to get a sense of what the potential of that is right here. He was a big fan of Constable, my book back here today. But this one was recently acquired at the MFA in Boston. I mean, in the last 5 years, I think. And it's one of those Women of Tangiers kinds of paintings. I think the Metropolitan Museum in New York has one with 4 figures in it. I've never seen this one before. I know the work in the MFA well, but this one here is one of those things that sort of, in my mind, gives him a bad name. It's very beautiful, and it's various interpretations of color, treatment of color in lots of places and ways. And yet it's got this terribly sort of chaotic organization as a picture, which is not, look at the other ones we just looked at. These are pretty reasonably organized pictures. I still don't think of him as the greatest organizer of pictures, but both of these pictures are really quite special. They're very good in that way. But I got used to seeing things like this and just dismissed Delacroix. But you can't dismiss his conversation about color and the fact that he uses actually what we call a prismatic palette, full colored palette, is not insignificant when you're thinking about an impressionist. But I'm just going to post these up here, and I'm going to read them with you. But I'm posting them so you have them if you want to read them. And I found them when I was reading once again his Delacroix's journals. It's been a long, long, long time, and I've never read them carefully. That first part of his journals he does this thing that's all about the sort of the hyper emotional state that many young artists find themselves in, trying to express their guts or something or other. And but eventually and even during some of that time, you can hear him searching out intellectually and the underpinnings of his field. And this conversation about painting, about color, is pretty, is in my view, pretty important. And by the way, I'll show you that in a minute. I'm going to say he's almost like the natural offspring of Titian, even though he doesn't come he's 100 years later or more. But he says this: painters who are not colorists practice illumination, not painting. Unless you're deliberately setting out to do a monochrome or a cameo painting in the proper sense of the word, you have to consider color as one of the most essential factors, together with chiaroscuro, proportion, and perspective. Now, these are the things I talk about on a constant basis, although depending on how you mean perspective. But proportion applies as well to sculpture as to painting. Perspective determines the contour. Chiaroscuro gives relief by the arrangement of lights and shadows in relation to the background. Color gives the semblance of life, etc. Now you notice that the arrangement of lights, he's talking about chiaroscuro, meaning this idea of relief. He says just against the background, but we're talking about effects and that whole idea that Leonardo has introduced to us and we've talked about recently. But so he's talking about these are the ingredients. But then what does he say? It's a little painful today. A sculptor does not begin with the contour. He builds up an appearance of the object with the material. It begins by being rough, but shows from the very outset the actual relief and solidity that are the chief characteristics of sculpture. Now there you are. That's a fascinating point. And each of these things need to be adjusted and thought through on their own. The colorist, by whom I mean, and by the way, the spelling of the word colorist is the English spelling. Americans don't use that U in there. The colorist, by whom I mean those artists who unite all the factors of painting. And that would include the Monet world and everybody Boston School. And the reason I'm bringing this to you, even with the title, is because this is always going to be about, on one level or another, I'm talking to you about the Boston School. I'm framing my conversation around how the Boston School thinking went, okay? So the colorist, by whom I mean those artists who unite all the factors of painting, must establish everything that is proper and necessary to their art at once, from the start of the work. And just as the sculptor masses in his work with clay or marble or stone, so the colorist must mass in color. And his sketch, like the sculptor's, must render at the same time proportion, perspective, color, and effect. How about that? And we're still going. In painting, the contour is a matter of idea and convention, just as it is in sculpture, and should arise naturally out of a proper arrangement of the essential parts. In the early stages of preparation, when the effect, which includes the perspective, is united with the color, the work approximates more or less closely to its ultimate appearance according to the ability of the artist. But even in the first stage of all, it will unmistakably contain the germ of all that is to come after. Now that's a virtual definition of what I call the Boston School start. And I suggested that it's for anybody who wants to work in color. And I talk about the holistic treatment. It's all the data, color and color values. We set them out there and we begin this process. It has everything to do with what happens where they meet, the production of effects, and then the relationship on the page, which is that sort of idea about proportion writ large. So in the early stages of preparation, when the effect, which includes the perspective, is united with the color, the effect is united. By the way, perspective, if you think of it as the idea of things going back, the effect might mean more to you. Or if you think of it as Leonardo said, as that projectiveness, the idea of what comes to your eye with the greatest speed. That stuff, but some things are sort of here and some things are here, right? Again, in the early stages of preparation, when the effect, which includes the perspective, is united with the color, the work approximates more or less closely to its ultimate appearance, according to the ability of the artist. But even in the first stage of all, it will unmistakably contain the germ of all that is to come after. So that's the holistic idea in painting. And I just wanted to share with you again the Hale comment. The trouble with trying for merely light and shade, merely for color, merely for drawing, is not only that we miss all the other qualities, but even that which we try for, we distort. A man who modestly tries to make the drawing, the values, the color as they appear, is apt, if he has the ability to do all three well. You can't get merely accurate modeling without the color. Indeed, if by some miracle one were able to paint each color right in tone, shape, and shift, the drawing would come by itself. There are simply other names for color. The truest drawing is a melange of light and shade. The moment a man searches for one quality alone, he does, by the very act, strip it of some of its most important attributes. We too often forget that all things are made manifest to us through the action of light. Light and shade cannot be truly rendered unless it includes color and form. Form, as it appears to us, cannot be rightly indicated without the aid of color and chiaroscuro. True color, cannot be well suggested unless the shapes are right and the modulation, in other words, the drawing and values. Is this not, and you have to consider this for yourself and think it through for yourself, is this not the same thing that Delacroix is concluding in his conversations about color and the colorist? It's something just for you to think about, and I present it to you as potentially it could be the influence of Delacroix on the thinking of the Boston School. These things are never readable. They always look really way more lit than they are in nature. But I mentioned early on that there's something about the work of Delacroix, the color work of Delacroix, that is very reminiscent and of Titian, who had that fame, for being a colorist. Of course, the Venetians in general. Of course, Veronese is considered possibly the greatest colorist, of all time, etc. But there's something obviously about this work right here is so reminiscent, apart from his lack of sort of clarifying outlines, contour, which, by the way, Delacroix does discuss valuing contour. But you can see that apart from that, this actually could be a Titian. And I'm talking now about the way he is seeing color. You might say the truth with which he's seeing color, but also the way he's drawing it forth. And but again, don't look at this. Look at the painting, and don't forget where this one is. Look at them where you can find them. Look at them in person, and hopefully look at them in a room that's well lit. Now, the Philip Hale's book is on Vermeer, and it's the one you can read that book on our website, studio.ingbretson.com. Find the list of books there. You can just pull it up. The reason Vermeer made his drawing so just, his values so true, was because he cared so much about color. His drawing, in his best things, came right because the chiaroscuro, here's the very word used by Delacroix. The edges and the color were rightly observed. He loved light and shade. He was a master of it, and the only way he could render its beauty as he saw it was by getting his drawing and his subtle color shifts just right. All of it. So you're seeing that thing, the idea of I think this is set at a different time. I don't think it's exactly the same pages as the other quote shows up by Hale that I just read previously. So those last two are quotes by Hale, and for your, I'm just posting them out here for you to look at. And I just wanted to just maybe have a little conversation on a different subject, just for briefly. But I'm just encouraging you to read certain aspects of Delacroix when he's not just talking sort of, emotional poetry, if you want to call it that, which I'm not going to dismiss as a bad thing. But I have a feeling there's a proper time for everything, and of course it does too depend on what you mean in terms of that. Because one of the problems with Delacroix, and what he was heard to have expressed that he believed that he did his best work under the influence of the brain fever from which he suffered, and nobody agreed with him. But he would talk in his book about getting worked up and how he couldn't do anything unless he was worked up. And then he talks later, of course, about how nice it is to be calm and how much that being worked up was such a thing. So if you read the Delacroix journals, read all of it. Don't just read the first whatever number of years that was when he was very young. Read everything, because there's clear wisdom and of course a lot of experience. This guy is definitely not minor. I'm still not going to tell you I'm a big fan of his murals or anything, but I haven't seen enough of them in person. Just the ones I've seen in the States, the color qualities of them don't lend themselves to what's been said about Delacroix. I've never found them to be these things that just make me want to have to go copy a Delacroix. So I'm not trying to put him down, though. I mean, I value him. What I really am trying to do, though, is say that when you're a colorist, these are the conversations you're going to have. You're going to talk about how important it is as a co-conspirator with all the other players in the room visual, But I want to share with you another quote now, and then so from time to time I talk about the Boston School, or I even try to defend the Boston School painters' lack of, quote, what we might call finish. And you can look at Delacroix as an influence in that way too, I suppose, if you want to. But here's an interesting quote that popped up: "Oh Rossini, oh Mozart, oh inspired genius in every art, you who draw from things only so much as you need to reveal them to our minds." Oh, you who draw from things only so much as you need to reveal them to our minds. So he's arguing, somebody would say sketch, but he does talk about specifically the way the sketch, the life is in the sketch, so frequently is lost in the iteration and the extension and in the working out of more greater detail. I'm one of those guys who doesn't believe that has to be so, and I agree with Degas that it's not whether you can get the life in 6 sittings, it's whether you can keep it in 60 while you're doing so many other fascinating and important things, sorting out your composition and all the rest. But oh Rossini, oh Mozart, and he was a musician, and he loved these two guys in particular around his time, Rossini and Mozart. Oh inspired genius in every art, you who draw from things only so much as you need to reveal them to our minds. This is virtually a description in my mind of the Boston School. And some worked up, some more than others. But, I've shown you before close-ups, and you can look at it for yourself online, of sections like this where you can't even find parts of it. But there's way more than you need for the game that's going on here, for the great, shall we say, composition, for the great display of light play, color play, and all this happening here to make this a remarkable event. And, Decamp here does not lose that. He's one of the Boston School guys, Joseph Decamp. He doesn't overdo it. He has no identification with noodling and where. By the way, one of the other conversations of Delacroix is about breadth. It's constantly talking about breadth. If you can do a nose with one chunk, why would you do it with all sorts of other little noodles? I'm putting words in his mouth, but it's rather like what he's saying. And he's talking about how much he admires that stuff. Now, the bigger pictures get, the more that becomes important. But the idea of breadth is a big Boston School conversation as well. And so you can see the grandeur, if you want to call it that, of the great forms that we've talked about in the most recently, the great simplicity. This is a reasonable version of this. It's not. It's very difficult to get a great version of this picture. subtle as it is. But nevertheless, I'm showing these to you, these three pictures, and I'm going to go to two others, Tarbell and Benson, just to show you how that works with the Boston School guys, that idea of just taking what you need and don't get greedy. Don't turn everything into little objects and prove that you know how to model an object into a realism, into an illusion. He has an interesting thing to say about illusion as well. It's worth your time to read Delacroix. So here's another one. Obviously, this is in that same precise class. Nothing's overly rendered. You can see these guys know how to. None of this stuff feels like it's out of truth. It looks like it's incredibly precise truth. It looks like it's really right on the money with proportions, with form, with color, with everything, right? But it's kind of a bit minimalist when it comes to drawing. It's not in the class of drawing for drawing's sake or drawing for the realism. This is drawing for a different mission. And this guy, Delacroix, is very good about talking about poetry and music and doing a little bit of a cross-pollination with our form. Not simply saying they're the same by any means. He's nuanced as can be. He was a musician himself and was always in these sorts of worlds. Aspired to write poetry. I don't know if he ever did. I'm not familiar with anything. But so there you can see it. You can see this isn't noodling in the modern sense of that word. And I share this with you because I want people who have got a background, like with Richard Lack or somebody in the Boston, what they call the Boston School way of working, to consider that other thing that Paxton rather does, which is this extended noodling, keep pushing and pushing. And I do not mean that to say that there's anything bad about that. I'm saying that this is a different model. It's a model. The other four guys have given us a model that says they're a little different. Their model is way more like the Delacroix one, where he's saying, just don't put anything in except what you just need, just what you need. Degas understood that really, really well as well. And there's the Benson. Isn't that remarkable? But again, it isn't one of those things where you get to go study which finger, what she was wearing for fingernail polish, Yeah. Isn't that magnificent? But that again is that idea of using just what you need and don't get greedy for more. Don't show off. The purpose of your painting isn't to show off some noodly skills. These guys all had all they needed in noodly directions. But they were after a bigger story. That is the great impact of the big impression. What was the word Delacroix uses? Another word, big effect, he may say. I think he may say big effect. We mean the big effect, that means the thing taken in as a whole. That thing was a big concern for him as well. So I guess I am recommending you read Delacroix, even though I do it with a little teeny bit of reservation for young people. Some people, I saw that somebody online was comparing him with Robert Henry and his use of color and stuff like that, but Henry does the same thing. I actually had to throw his book aside because it just made me totally nervous and upset. The idea of trying to gin up something like emotional states and things like that. I'm putting words in his mouth. It's been 30, 40, 50 years since I read that book, and I really probably should do him the justice of reading it all the way through. Nobody has to tell me that. I just said it myself. My friends out there. But the principle here, of having all that it takes, for example, the spotting, the distribution of the darks, the integration of the color scheme as a Monet model to give us the total atmosphere, all the stuff that related to the big picture, they continuing to push the composition to uncover what makes this, what makes this work compositionally, and pressing it home, but not in the noodly way, but in the Degas way, which is harmony, harmony, harmony. Here's one by Hale, down in the Pennsylvania Academy, I think. But there's the guy. I don't consider him to be the guy that really owned that idea better than the rest, but that idea, I mean, either of not saying more than you need, which I don't think he's bad at, but I think the summation he makes in his explanation of all this stuff is often better played out, or the examples of the other three guys are probably a little better than some of his, or a lot of his even. I don't know, some of you may plausibly get upset with me for diminishing him, but if you look up the body of the work, you'll see probably what I mean. I don't do that. It isn't that I lack respect for Hale. It's just that he doesn't embody the concepts I'm trying to show you as much. He was actually more, rather than a Boston School guy, with this whole idea of if you want to call it the simultaneity of effect and color, he was more about broken color in the Monet model. That's my interpretation of him. So I don't find him as useful for conveying the ideas surrounding the work of the other guys, which have that in common, those three guys, Tarbell, Benson, and DeCamp. That's my interpretation, of course, obviously. And then finally, we have oh, is that it? Did I list somebody out? No, I didn't. I got them all. Okay. So you can see what I mean by that. So there's that. Let's just do that again. Oh, Rossini, Mozart. Oh, inspired genius in every art. You who draw from things only so much as you need to reveal them to our minds. So again, that's one of those things that tells you do you have a concept of the thing fixed in your mind and eye before you ever start this thing? It's such an important thing to then, how else or what better way will you know when you've arrived in this picture and can walk away? Well, when you've achieved that, and no more, don't put any more in. The one other thing you could talk about, in comparison these guys aren't imaginative painters; they're painting from life. It's impressionism. All the work of Delacroix is imaginative. He talks about how much happier he is with what he does when he's painting figures not from life. And as I was saying, that is one of those concepts related to draftsmanship, that you can make up a figure and make a horse stand there and look plausible, and you can give him that massive sense of form and all that stuff, and without having a model sitting in front of you and noodling on it, in that sort of a way. So there's that interpretation. But it's interesting to think of this guy as thinking, let's put down some color notes and let's find out where the drawing is. You see that there's some sort of a sense, a level of lost and found in his thinking. It's already inherent in it in some ways. And do remember that Ang quote as well, where Ang says, really, you have to be. And by the way, these guys were just 10 years, I think maybe Delacroix was 10 years younger than 15, 18 years younger than Ang. But so almost a generation. And Ang says numbers of rather evil things about Delacroix. And that was, I think, probably the greater part of the influence from Gamel and Paxson were really, really into, I would say in particular, Paxson was really into as it were, the modern use of that term, into Ang. And this wouldn't have been any kind of a chief model for him. But this does give you a better feeling for example, the Algaleo by Sargent, and for that kind of, mass-based, effect-based painting that's characteristic of the Boston School. Not that they're doing it the same way. This is, in some senses, more like Sargent, a bigger brush and that sort of thing. But yeah, all right, I better leave it at that. This wasn't supposed to be a long one, but I hope you have those things in front of you now to give you a chance to look at them. And we don't have Delacroix's journals. It's hard to find one online where you can excerpt anything. I had to type this stuff up. If there's any misspellings in this stuff in there, it's my fault. But for your sake, we did it, and for the sake of the Boston School. So I hope that begins to cover something. It's the Delacroix as an influence. And if we talked about Delacroix as an influence, color is a big deal. And the way he talks about color is so similar. And you can look around further and further. You can look in other places for further conversations about color with other kinds of painters and find that the conversations sort of come to the same place. It really is a holistic problem. And Boston School guys, you can see they knew that. Okay. All right. Again, I want to thank my good supporters. Lauren K., you've been so faithful for so long. Jillian C. and Patrick S., thank you for coming aboard, and keep it coming, folks, in general. We appreciate those. we do need them. I don't need them, but the Mr. Producer does to keep the amount of work he has to do to edit these things. And by the way, if you ever see anything wrong in here, he has set up a studio for me, and I sometimes change things, and he's got this problem after that. So whatever this said, this looks good. It's Mr. Producer, and the sound is one of those things too. So, all right, okay, you all. I hope you have a wonderful week thinking about Delacroix and the Boston School. Oh, whoops! I'm in trouble. Don't forget to sign up for the workshop in London. This is coming right up. We're a little more than a month away from it, maybe 6 weeks away from it. 4 weeks intensive, really to think through the Boston School thinking and to give you hands-on activity with it and critiques on it. So it's a real chance, a real opportunity for you guys over there on that side of the river. Or the pond, I guess they call it, don't they? The river, yeah. So I don't know if there's more that I should say. Mr. Producer's already posting stuff, so all right. Okay, guys. See you in the next one.